Hello and welcome to this episode of True Crime South Africa, where we explore the dark and disturbing stories of some of the most notorious serial killers in the country. Today, we are going to delve into the twisted mind of Boetie Boer, also known as Stewart Wilken, who murdered at least 12 people, including his own daughter, between 1990 and 1997. This video contains graphic descriptions of violence and abuse, so viewer discretion is strongly advised.
This time, a woman was found naked and strangled to death.
Boetie Boer, which means brother farmer in Afrikaans, was born as Stewart Wilken in 1966 in Boksburg, a town near Johannesburg. His early life was marked by trauma and abandonment. When he was only 6 months old, he and his 2-year-old sister were left in a phone booth by their biological parents. They were rescued by a domestic worker who took them to her employer, a man named Doep. Doep raised the siblings, but also abused them physically and sexually. One day, Wilken's sister disappeared, and he never saw her again. Wilken was later adopted by a couple who lived next door to Doep, Mr. and Mrs. Wilken. They gave him a new name and moved to Port Elizabeth, where he grew up. Wilken struggled in school, both academically and socially. He showed signs of aggression and cruelty, especially towards animals. He was also reportedly molested by a neighbor when he was 9 years old. As an adult, Wilken worked as a farmer and a handyman, earning him the nickname Boetie Boer. He married twice and had 4 children, 2 from each marriage. However, his marriages were marred by violence and infidelity. He also had a history of drug and alcohol abuse.
In 1997, when he was arrested, it sounded like something out of a movie.
Wilken's killing spree began in 1990, during a period of political and social turmoil in South Africa as the country was transitioning out of apartheid. His victims were mainly young boys aged 9 to 14 and female prostitutes working in Johannesburg. He targeted these groups because they were vulnerable and easy to lure. He used various methods to abduct his victims, such as offering them rides, money, or drugs. Once he had them under his control, Wilken subjected them to unimaginable torture and brutality. He stabbed, beat, strangled, and mutilated them. He also sodomized some of his male victims and cannibalized some of his female victims. He showed no remorse or empathy for his actions and even claimed to enjoy them. Wilken killed at least 12 people over 7 years, but the actual number could be higher, as some of his victims were never identified or reported missing. He also killed his own daughter, Wane, who was 14 years old at the time. He claimed that he did it because she was sexually abused by her stepfather, and he wanted to send her soul to God. He also killed his stepson, Henry Bakers, who was 11 years old. He confessed that he had sex with his decomposing corpse and ate his nipples.
Suddenly, we had a serial killer. His name was Stewart Boetie Boer Wilken.
The investigation into Wilken's crimes was challenging and lengthy. It involved multiple police units, forensic experts, profile analysts, and witnesses. The police had to connect the dots between the murders of the street children and the prostitutes, who were often overlooked or ignored by the authorities. They also had to deal with the lack of evidence, the poor quality of the crime scenes, and the unreliability of some of the informants. The breakthrough came in 1997, when Wilken was caught red-handed trying to kidnap a young boy in Port Elizabeth. He was arrested and interrogated, and he soon confessed to his crimes. He also led the police to some of the locations where he had dumped the bodies of his victims. Ironically, the same political changes that coincided with his killing spree also helped to catch him. The end of apartheid brought more attention and resources to the plight of the marginalized groups that Wilken preyed on. Wilken's trial in 1997 was one of the most sensational and shocking in South African history. He was charged with 10 counts of murder and 5 counts of sodomy. He pleaded guilty to all charges and gave detailed and graphic accounts of his crimes. He showed no emotion or remorse, and even smiled and joked at times. He also claimed that he was possessed by a demon and that he heard voices telling him to kill. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence against Wilken, including forensic tests, witness testimonies, and his own confessions. The defense tried to argue that Wilken was mentally ill and that he suffered from multiple personality disorder. They also tried to blame his upbringing and his drug addiction for his behavior. The judge, Justice Chris Jansen, rejected the defense's arguments and found Wilken guilty on all charges. He sentenced him to 7 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. He also told Wilken that he would have given him the death penalty if it was still available in South Africa. He described Wilken as a monster and a menace to society. Wilken is still serving his sentence in a maximum security prison. He has made several attempts to appeal his conviction and to apply for parole, but they have all been denied. His case has sparked debates and discussions about the causes and prevention of serial killing, the vulnerability and protection of street children and sex workers, and the role of social and political factors in violence. Wilken is widely regarded as one of the most notorious and evil serial killers in South African history. His name and his crimes still haunt the collective memory of the nation. He is also the subject of several books, documentaries, and podcasts, such as the Showmax original series, Devil's Dorp. His story serves as a reminder of the horrors that humans are capable of and the need for justice and compassion for the victims.